It's the Autosport Podcast. We explain what the return of Formula 2 means for the road to F1 and preview the junior single-seater season. Formula 2 pops back into existence in Bahrain on the weekend of April the 15th and 16th, with the first round of the series formerly known as GP2. Last month, the long-running saga of whether or not the Formula 2 title really would be revived and to which series it would be attached was finally resolved, with Chase Carey, boss of Formula 1 Group, enlighteningly telling the world that the junior categories, and especially the upcoming Formula 2 Championship, are strategic activities for Formula 1. My name is Ed Straw, the Editor-in-Chief of Autosport, and to discuss what that actually means and to look ahead to what should be a dramatic season is Marcus Simmons, Deputy Editor of Autosport magazine and our resident specialist on the junior single-seater ladder. Marcus, you're an aficionado of what might be called original F2, recently writing about attending the Thruxton round in 1973, so presumably you're very happy to see the category reappear, although I don't think Henri Pescarolo is going to be in the mix in Bahrain.
Well, you never know, but no, probably not. Yeah, I think what you're saying is I'm probably the only staff member old enough to remember the original Formula 2, but yeah, had lots of great days watching races there when it came to UK circuits. And yeah, the Formula 2 name I think is important, and I think that the GP2 series gaining the name of Formula 2 is probably the ideal scenario for that. Okay, we're not going to have marches and martinis on the grid, but it's a one-make formula, but it is a very strong one-make formula, and I'm glad to see that happen.
Also joining me is a very special guest who will be playing a major part in what happens on track in F2 this year, Jordan King. Jordan, you're heading into your third season in what was GP2. You have a unique advantage over the rest of your competitors as you're the only driver who's actually raced in F2 before, having done 6 races in the previous revival of F2, I think in 2011. So that's got to give you a big advantage, surely.
Well, I think you're trying to pull on some short strings there. No, it's good to stay in what was GP2 again, and now Formula 2, even though I'm technically a rookie, if that makes sense. But the previous life of Formula 2, as you said, I did a few races at a time. I was the youngest person to drive Formula 2 in the modern era, and now it's in its second modern era. I think it's great for the sport to get the F2 name back into it, explaining it to the outside people when I go to my sponsors and say, oh, it's Formula 2, not GP2. That makes sense to them. So I think it's great for the sport in a general public image.
It's just logical, isn't it? Formula 2. It's very obvious what it is. GP2 sounds a bit more left field. And
well, we've now got Formula 3, Formula 4 as well. So, there is a nice order down from Formula 1.
Well, that's a good topic to start on. We'll talk a little bit about your prospects and preparations for the season in a minute. But looking at the wider picture of F2, obviously, Marcus, you talked a little bit about how positive it is to have it back. Can you just explain what's gone on here? Because I think it was 2015 when the FIA first said, yes, we want an F2 championship, and they had various ideas about what form that would take and some fairly optimistic structures for the kind of budgets that would be involved and that kind of thing. So how have we got to this point?
Well, that's right. It was always at the back of their minds, really, from the early days of the FIA Single-Seater Commission and when Gerhard Berger was in charge. But at that point, we're talking 2012 to 14, really, it was put on the back burner because the main targets then were to get the Formula 3 European Championship strong and also to establish FIA Formula 4 across the world. Both of those were done. It kicked up a gear when Jean Todt was campaigning for his election for a second term as FIA president, and it was in his manifesto that one of the main targets was to introduce an FIA Formula 2. And about the same time, Stefano Domenicali took over from Gerhard Berger as president of the Single-Seater Commission. With Formula 3 and Formula 4 up and running, if you like, that became their main target. It has been a subject that's waxed and waned over the last couple of years. Originally, there was talk that the FIA might even introduce their own new formula, which at that time would have gone up against what was then called GP2 and what was then called Formula Renault 3.5. So a lot of people were saying, well, there's not going to be room for that. Something's going to have to make way. Fairly soon, it became clear that the more likely scenario would be trying to do a deal with GP2, and that really took a very long time because there was some reluctance on the part of Bernie Ecclestone. He wanted GP2 and GP3 to really remain independent of the FIA. Obviously, with the change in ownership of Formula One, of which GP2 and GP3 is part of that, it's become a completely different situation. And the first inklings I got that this was possibly going to happen even for this year was around late January, I think, and it happened very quickly. But yeah, it has been a rather long drawn out saga, but which actually in its final days was resolved very quickly.
Jordan, how much has actually changed for the driver in the car? It looks to me like a new name and a new logo, but not a great deal else has changed at this time.
I think at the moment that is about it. As Marcus touched on it, it's been a long time coming, and everyone has been putting everything on back burners waiting to find out what happens, and then suddenly it happened very quickly, so there's very little that can change. So I think the bigger changes will come 12 months down the line. We'll get a new car, there'll be a new engine, it'll be brought in line with Formula One. I would have thought the cars will look slightly closer to Formula One as they normally do. The tyre models will go down the route they're taking, the engines will go down the route they're taking, so I assume we'll now get a turbo engine rather than a normally aspirated engine. So,
although of course Formula One's got engine plans for 2021 down the line, so I guess trying to second guess what's going to happen there, so it's aligned is going to be the challenge, isn't it?
That's always the thing, but normally with what was GP2, which will now be Formula 2, they followed Formula 1 but a couple years behind, so I assume we will head more down that route. And if you look at the engine that's used in the GP3 car at the moment, or even the Formula 3 car, it's in a nice place that you'd be able to add a turbo onto it to increase the power.
So it sounds like there's a good direction. I mean, Marcus, can you say any more on where you expect F2 to be over the next few years, or is it still these basic ideas that need to be properly shaped and exactly what the car spec is and get the budgets so they make sense and it's affordable?
I doubt that anyone knows, really.
That's the usual answer in this kind of thing, isn't it?
As we were talking about, it's happened so quickly. I think now comes the time when people do have to start discussing what Formula 2 is going to be. You did mention budgets, and obviously this is something that is relevant across the whole single-seater landscape at the moment. Formula 2, Formula 3, GP3, it is very expensive. And I know when Jean Todt was first thinking of a new FIA Formula 2, he was saying that budget should be no more than €1 million.
While at the same time suggesting there should be some kind of hybrid engine that would put the cost up even more.
That's right, yeah. And I mean, even current Formula 2, it's very difficult to see how teams can get the budget down to a maximum of €1 million, because motor racing is a very expensive thing at the moment. So,
and there's often the misunderstanding, I think, amongst people that teams are coining it in with the amount of money they're charging, but it's a hugely expensive business, even F2 with a spec car.
It is very expensive, and actually it's a bit of a misnomer to say that one make racing is by definition cheaper, because obviously those spec parts are all being sold by one organisation at a price, whereas in the old days of competition, not just on chassis but engines, etc., it was possible for the competitors, the very, very good drivers, to get a free chassis or a free engine or something like that. Competition can cost a hell of a lot more, but it can also be cheaper. And so it is a difficult environment for the sport, because yes, the spec chassis nature of it does prevent outrageous development and costs going up that way, but then again, everybody has to pay a fixed price for their equipment.
We'll come back a little bit more to the kind of junior single-seater ladder and the implications lower down later on, but let's come back to this season. Jordan, you've had 2 years in GP2 previously. You've moved to MP Motorsport for this year from racing engineering, so why is that? And can you tell us a little bit about where you've been in pre-season testing? Obviously, there have been 6 days of testing, 3 in Barcelona, 3 in Bahrain. Your headline times were nothing extraordinary, but headline lap times are just a tiny window into 6 days of running, and the long run stuff is much more important. So where do you feel you are? How are you settling in with the new team?
Well, MP, it's been a kind of a 3-year process of them trying to get me to try for them, basically. When I first stepped out of Formula 3, they tried quite hard. Well, obviously, racing engineering came out on top. And, this year over the winter, they were trying very, very hard, and time was right. Well, I felt the time was right, and and the deal that was put forward was right for where I am. So that's why I chose to head down that route with them. And I've been pretty impressed with how active they are and how willing they are to try and make progress, try and improve everything. We ran through a very good program in winter testing. Bahrain, we focused massively on the long runs. We even saved 2 sets of new tyres for our long runs. So I don't think there was many people that did that. But overall, no, it all seemed pretty positive. When you look at the times, okay, it's always hard to tell what other people are doing and how much fuel they're running. But when you looked at corrected times versus what we were doing, it looked reasonably strong.
Racing Engineering is regarded as one of the top teams. MP Motorsport, a little bit less so. It's certainly a lower profile team. So does it feel like moving from a big team to a smaller one, or is it a team that's kind of ready to break through?
There are aspects of that. The fact that Racing Engineering was established, they've got 10 years of history to lean on, and gradually, making 1% increases throughout the whole year, they get further down the road than where MP, started 4 or 5 years ago. But I think that's part of the reason why they really wanted me there, as I had the experience from already doing a couple of years in GP2, and both of us firing ideas off each other. We have made, I feel, amongst the team, whether we're actually much quicker on the circuit is a different matter, but back in the garage and everything, we're making good progress with the way people are working, the speed at which they're working, the ideas that people are coming up with. So there are a lot of improvements going on behind the scene, which is definitely helpful.
They may be a Dutch-based team, but the British people there, Tony and Sarah Shaw and Jeremy Cottrell, were people you worked with at the beginning of your car racing career.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of homecoming. Pretty much everyone in the team I've known for 5 or 6 years. I drove for MP back in 2012 as well with Formula Renault, so I know most of the guys there. So yeah, when I got in the car in Abu Dhabi, it was very much just like being back at home. It was easy to get on with everybody, and you know how everybody reacts when you give them criticism or you give them praise. So that kind of battle was already won.
And so what are your objectives for the season? Obviously every driver's aiming to win the championship. That's the ultimate goal. What do you think is possible? You were 7th last year, had a couple of sprint race victories.
Well, I actually found last year finishing 7th was quite disappointing. Going into the last round, I could have finished 3rd or I could have finished 9th. So it was a very close battle between us from 3rd down to 9th. And unfortunately, I had a terrible last weekend, so ended up 7th, as you said. But we generally had pace and performances to finish easily in the top 5 in the championship. So I don't see why that can't be possible this year. And I'd like to be able to get to the last race and be in the hunt for the championship.
It does feel like it's kind of dependent from an outside perspective on the team level and the level MP is able to operate at. So it sounds like you're quite encouraged in that regard.
There's lots of different things. GP2, there isn't an exact science to it, and we saw last year that it doesn't matter if you're winning it after halfway through the year. You can be consistent and still be at the front. And I don't think Marcello was the only one out of the top 10 that hadn't won a race, I think, and he finished 3rd. So you don't have to be winning races, but it helps a lot more if you do win races, as you score more points off one race. So there's definitely a lot more to it than just, okay, go quick, get the results. You do lean on the team a lot, and you can see some drivers really lean on the team, and they don't have to do much themselves when there's so much backing from the team.
Well, let's bring Marcus into this in terms of assessing Jordan's performance, just to create a nice awkward atmosphere. From your expert vantage point, what do you think you need to see from Jordan to kind of deliver a championship winning performance? What are the little areas of, not weakness, but the areas where really have to just find that extra 1%, and then we'll compare notes and see if you think that's fair or not?
I'll cry and leave the room.
It's difficult to say, really. It is quite a hard series to read, quite unpredictable as well, just the way the race weekend format works. One thing that Jordan was fantastic at last year was making the absolute most of being at the front of the grid for the reverse grid races on the Sunday and converting them into wins. And there was a lot of pressure. The 2 races I was at in July in Austria and Britain, it was a really tough job, but he did both of them really well. Now, Jordan's going to say, I don't want to be at the front of the grid for the reverse grid. I want to be on the race 1 podium and having to fight through. So I think it's probably fair to say, looking at last season, that you probably want to just nail the qualifying a bit better and be in the first 2 rows and then crack on from there.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair, to be honest.
You've not run out of the room, that's positive.
No, I'm not crying. No, that's completely fair. As Marcus said, in Austria and Silverstone, where we won the reverse grid race, for me, I came away from that weekend and that was more damage limitation. Whereas in Austria, we were running well, it rained, we made the wrong strategy call and ended up down in 12th and managed to get into 8th, got the reverse grid race and then won it. And then similar in Silverstone, we were 1-2 as a team and made the wrong strategy call, ended up 12th and 13th, I think, after pit stops, and then had a last 3-lap dash at the end to try and get back into the top 8, and that was a similar thing, then got the reverse grid pole and won the race. So I think both weekends where I did win the reverse grid race were actually disappointing from my side and the team side, as we probably should have won, if not finished on the podium in the first race. But I completely agree with Marcus. If you're starting from pole in the first race, it makes it a lot easier weekend from the word go anyway, and you don't have to chase your way through.
Well, let's look at a few of the people you're up against. Let's say, removing you from the equation, the title favourites. From where I'm sitting, Oliver Rowland at Dams. You'd think that's a team that should be able to come through. The driver who's got pace, but maybe didn't quite achieve as much as he should have done last season. And you've also got Charles Leclerc at Prema. Prema won the championship last year, or first and second, with Pierre Gasly and Antonio Giovinazzi. Those seem to me to be the kind of 2 on paper favourites. What do you reckon, Marcus? Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that. More specifically on Leclerc, because okay, he's a rookie to Formula 2 this year, but he was GP3 champion last year. He's a fantastic talent. He's with the team that won the championship last year, Prema. Last year we saw with Giovinazzi that being a rookie in what was then called GP2 isn't necessarily going to set you back too much. So he's looking very, very strong for this year. Oliver Rowland, we all know how talented he is. We all know Dams' history. But the question mark for me is that both he and the team had very disappointing seasons last year. We just need to really see what the state of play is over the first couple of races, because as we've already explained before, they have looked very strong in testing so far, but it's very difficult to read too much into that.
What do you reckon, Jordan? Obviously, you've been there through testing, seeing what the pace of these guys is.
The first point Marcus made with Giovinazzi, when your car is that much stronger than everyone else's, I think it does make it a lot easier for you to win races. So the 2 Prema cars, you can't rule out if they produce a car like they did last year. That's going to be very hard to beat both of them.
The other Prema car being Antonio Fuoco.
Yes,
yeah. Ferrari aligned, and it's been a little bit erratic, but on his day,
yeah,
very quick.
Exactly.
On a bad day, things can go quite badly wrong.
People said the same about Antonio last year. Very good, but a bit erratic. And when he was in the Prema car and they were 1-2 clear of everyone else, it looked a lot easier for them. So I think that can always be a tough one to call when you go into season, and if they do produce it, it will be hard. And you can't put it past Ferrari that they've put a lot of effort into these 2 young guys to do well. So they're going to be well prepared, as if they're not rookies anyway. They'll be ready from the word go. Marcus is also completely correct on Dams. I think last year, Lynn's a very good driver. Alex Lynn's a very good driver, but seemed to struggle to do it every weekend. Would win one weekend, and then I think at Silverstone he was right at the back of the grid. So there was a very up and down feel to it. So that could always happen to Ollie this year. But saying that, I think Nicholas Latifi, I don't think we can write him off either.
He was quickest in one of the tests, wasn't he?
He was quickest at Bahrain. At Barcelona last year, he finished second, fully on merit and pace. So you never know if he gets underneath the skin of Ollie and starts doing well there. He could be the number 1 driver at Dams. Russian time are going to be good. They were strong last year. I tested with them at the end of the year. They've got a very good team and personnel behind them. Two very good drivers. Artem's in his 4th year now, I think.
Yeah, won the Monaco feature last year, so a little bit of good fortune. But
we'll forget that one.
but Markelov's a driver who a few years ago looked like a complete no-hoper at the back, and then he's gradually shown himself to be a handy performer.
They put a very good car out, and I think they've got two good drivers in the car. So
Luca Giotto in the other seat, he looks like the obvious spearhead. So we saw him have a run for the GP3 title a few years ago and just miss out.
I rate Markelov quite highly, actually. I think he last year he struggled in qualifying, but his racing performances are always quite good. So I don't think it will be a one guy team. It will be a joint challenge from both of them.
Is it fair to say Markelov is like the Sergio Perez of F2, and he does look after his tyres very well, doesn't he?
After doing the test with them, I think they've got a very good car on tyres. Put it that way. I think they have a good car on tyres. Because watching the way they drive, they can push hard the whole race, which is quite impressive. I remember being behind Artem in Spa. Just think, how is his tyre staying alive? And he was driving away from me like he was going out of fashion. So, yeah, they'll be strong. ART, we saw at the start of the year, Nobu was really strong until he got told off a few times, and then I assume he lost his way a little bit. But at the start of the year, he was really strong.
And he's a Honda protege, so
Honda putting a lot of backing into him as well.
Straight away when he came into GP2 when he was first in Europe a few years ago, he was quick. It was a bit strange last year not to see him start to deliver some consistency. So I guess there's a kind of fresh start this year.
It's hard to say about Albon, the other car in ART. I just don't know. It's an unknown quantity to me. It's not something that I've really seen. But Nobu, I think if he really does get his head down and work on it, he's really quick, and we've seen that when he wins races, he drives away from people, and he's put it on pole a couple of times. He is a solid driver. So it'll be the usual teams, usual suspects. I think will be challenging at the front. Arden, they've got some good backing into the team. I was teammates with Nato last year. I know he's quite good, so they'll be strong.
He's the highest ranked returnee from last year. He's in that kind of morass of drivers year, and he was 5th in the championship. Then so you were 7th, and Giotto 8th, Roland 9th. So if you're just looking at the drivers with experience who were there last year, those are the kind of 4. So is Nato someone? He seems to be quick on his day, and then have ones where he goes missing. There've been a few little errors here and there, but he's always looked like there's a driver in there, but just not
definitely. So he, I think he was leading the championship after 2 rounds last year. I think he was 40 points in front of me, straight away. A much better first couple of rounds, and then by midway through the year, I'd caught up and overtaken him. So he's clearly got the speed. He won the first race last year, won Monza reverse grid, I think it was, and is very encouraging. But he doesn't mind a bit of a ding dong with people, I think.
One thing about Leclerc, I mean, he's an incredibly stylish, elegant, very fast driver. But the one question mark I've got over him from his last couple of years in Formula 3 and GP3 is that if there's a championship fight at stake, he's a little bit reluctant to get involved. We saw that play against him a couple of times in the GP3 reverse grid races, and it's obviously the same format in Formula 2. That might be quite interesting. I would imagine that he'll probably see that as something that he's got to work on himself as well. And he's obviously in a different environment this year with Prema, who he's never driven for before, but have a very strong track record in managing drivers and giving them every possible piece of guidance that they can need to address what they need to. It's very unusual for this championship to be wrapped up long before the finish, and there are a lot of drivers out there who can definitely win races.
And obviously it's also a complicated championship to race in terms of the race formats with the tyre compounds. The high-deg Pirelli tyres are still there. Sometimes you've got to make the choice to go on the shorter life tyres and then have to come through some people. Sometimes if you go with the more durable tyre, you run the risk of all sorts of safety cars and that kind of thing getting in the way. So whatever happens, you're going to have to fight.
That's one of the good things and the bad things about the championship. It throws a lot of curveballs, which is great for spectators. Everything happens in it. You never know what's going to happen. There's loads of overtaking. But from a driver's point of view, there's so many variables. It actually becomes quite frustrating. I finished races last year where I was like, I couldn't have got that car across a line 1 second faster. That was the best I've ever driven in my life. And yet you'd finish like 14th because everything had just gone against you that race. From
your perspective, Jordan, what would you prefer? If you could just reinvent F2 for this season with immediate effect to suit you, what would you rather have?
I don't think it's don't reinvent the wheel. I think it's more the sport that's very political. It's a very political game. I don't think that's just a problem that motorsport has. I think quite a lot of sport has the problem in general. But it's a massively political game. With the people in power, who gets the race seats, even with which teams are quicker, can be down to very much politics, who's in the right team at the right time, and this type of thing. I would quite like to see something a bit more like, say, the American football system, where it's a college system, draft system, and all the players go to the draft system. They then get picked by the teams, and then if the worst teams can pick the better players and that type of thing. And I think that keeps it a lot fairer. It stops just one person controlling what happens in the sport and how one driver can get taken along. And we both know that it's a very big money game, this sport. And if one driver gets picked up, gets the backing put into them, they can make it to the top regardless of what happens. And we've seen that numerous times over the years, not just recent history. That's happened all over the past.
Well, obviously the super license points have been brought in to slightly counteract that.
If you look at the actual grid of F1 and you look at the drivers in it, even world champions, Kimi Raikkonen wouldn't be in there.
Yep.
Alonso wouldn't be in there. Vettel probably wouldn't be in there. So there's lots of drivers who you would think are the greatest drivers in the world that wouldn't be there. Verstappen definitely wouldn't be there. Now you have to do at least 1 year in Formula 2 and you have to get enough super license points. So in some ways, they're actually keeping the power with the drivers that are already in there. You'll get people like Massa staying on longer and Alonso staying on longer because there's less drivers being able to come up. But also with that, as we mentioned previously, there's not an exact science to getting the points. You could blow an engine up, completely not down to your fault, especially in the spec championship where it's a spec engine, you can't control it. It's completely not your fault. You end up finishing fourth in the championship because, as we said, they're very, very tight championships. You go into the last race challenging for the win, end up finishing fifth. You don't score enough points. And also with that, if you're not got the golden tick from somebody who's in the position, you won't break through that glass ceiling anyway. So it's a very tricky balance, I think.
Any solution to that, do you reckon, Marcus? There's a big question. If you can't answer that one, somebody's going to want to get you to lay out how to recreate motorsport.
That's a tough one, isn't it? I do think that Formula One teams err on the side of conservatism quite a lot. I would like to see more young drivers given a chance.
And that's partly down to the lack of testing opportunities.
But it's also there are only 20 seats.
Yeah,
when I was,
and they hardly change during a season as they would have done in the past.
Yeah, so when I was at school and then a student, there were 35 to 38 F1 cars, F1 drives available. 9 of them being knocked out in pre-qualifying on a Friday morning, but still these drivers were in F1, so there were a lot more opportunities then. And I don't really know what the solution is. I mean, one thing is Ross Brawn's raised the idea of non-championship F1 races. I don't know how serious he was, but something like that I think would be pretty cool, really, because that would be a great opportunity for, say, Ferrari to give Charles Leclerc a drive in a non-championship F1 race, or Manor, if they were still on the grid, to give you a drive. And something like that would be absolutely great, but obviously the F1 calendar's now so big, so where are they going to fit these things in? It's a tough one.
I think even with that idea, whether there was one car, Pirelli had a test car, whether that was used as a B car on the grid or something like that, say, right, the championship winning car from last year, that's used for the previous year. Okay, this year it would be a bit slower, but at least there's someone in Formula One. They can then try and raise the finances to go and do it. It only costs a fraction of what it would cost to run the full race team, or introducing something that means they're guaranteed to get some budget from FOM. Formula 2 is a profit-making organisation. So, there's excess budget in places that could be allocated elsewhere to help drivers get a break, start somewhere, or even just make it more accessible. And whenever a new driver comes into Formula 1, you say like Max Verstappen or Kvyat when he came in, Sainz, when all these new drivers come in, everyone always has a big buzz about them. Oh, look how amazing they were, look at what they've achieved, how good they are. But then when you look at them back in the junior formula, yes, they were good, but they weren't suddenly 20 times better than everyone else. They were on par, they were winning races, or they would get beaten. So I think there's another 30 of us that are waiting in the sidelines who are just as good, if not better, than a lot of the people in Formula 1. But, the politics doesn't quite line up for everyone. And as Marcus said, there's 20 seats, and there's probably 50 people who are legitimately good enough to be in Formula 1.
Obviously, the difficult thing is there's always the commercial aspect. For example, so Marcus mentioned the idea of a non-championship race, but obviously teams are going to want to know it's cost effective to go there, so you're going to have something that's marketable. And while I think ourselves and Autosport readers will probably be quite interested to see Jordan King in a Mercedes versus Charles Leclerc in a Ferrari versus Nobuharu Matsushita in a McLaren, or I think he's going to be struggling to be in that fight. But the vast majority of people who are making it commercially viable aren't that interested.
You could make it a rights-free weekend. So suddenly 5 or 6 TV companies come along and say, okay, it's Formula 1, it's not the big name drivers, it's not part of the championship, but we'll happily give X amount of money to cover the non-championship weekends. You've got 2 or 3 rights-free weekends where you get the more publicity buzz. Passes are free for everyone in the paddock, and they'll make the money elsewhere. But at the moment it's so controlled, it becomes very difficult to actually think outside the box and do something different. Now I think the new owners are really starting to change that. I think we've seen that in a very short period of time that they've changed that massively. But to your point, that is it commercially viable? Well, I think it could be. You just need to do it in a different way.
Comes from breaking out of the existing model, doesn't it? Which could take a few years, obviously, with all the bilateral agreements with it.
Yeah, if you said to the teams, right, there's a non-championship weekend, one car is allowed to be the race driver, and then another car has to be a young driver or your test driver or something, or you can have both race drivers, but you have to pay a bit of a forfeit or something. There's 2 or 3 weekends like that. There's no rights agreement between anyone, so TV companies come along and just do the 1 weekend deal, or sponsors can do a 1 weekend deal. I think you would be able to create more of a buzz, and you see that in other sports where they have one-off championships elsewhere or one-off events that create a massive buzz. So like the Super Bowl.
Looking back a little bit more at F2 itself this year, we talked about quite a few drivers, but there's a few other interesting cases out there. Obviously, your old team, Racing Engineering, they've got Louis Delatraz, who was runner-up in the Formula V8 3.5, which was the Renault World Series. He's obviously a quick driver. Gustav Malya, who doesn't have a brilliant CV, but he's shown a good turn of pace on occasion, particularly last year. So do you think of some of the outsiders who might surprise?
Well, they're a very good team, and they're very good at helping the driver understand how to drive quickly, especially over race distances. So I have no doubt that they'll be strong. Whether they can turn that into a full year championship, it's yet to be seen. As you said, Malya's been quick, shown some good race results last year. Delatraz is clearly fast. He's finished second in 3.5. But Formula 2 is a different championship to that, and who knows? So I'm sure they'll be there.
How's your teammate getting on? Sergio Setkamar, obviously Marcus knows him well from F3. He's a quick driver, again one who maybe hasn't accumulated the results he should have done, but there's clearly speed there. Yeah,
I don't think you become a Red Bull driver without having speed, so he's clearly fast. You can see that he is fast. Looking at his data and some of his understanding, he's very good. But I think he's quite young as well. I think he's only 19, isn't he? So you can see that as well in him with some of it. He does lean on the team a lot and ask a lot of information from the team.
Marcus, there's an interesting lineup at Rapax. Nick De Vries, the McLaren Junior, who was 6th in GP3 last year, and Johnny Cecotto Jr., who is the most experienced GP2 driver of all time. 119 starts, going all the way back to 2009. He did appear to have retired from this thing.
Well, he did a bit of a masser on us, didn't he? I think he retired and then came back when he realised he couldn't live without it. But yeah, those two, Cecotto and De Vries, they properly belong in that group of drivers I referred to earlier, who, if they won a race, you wouldn't be shocked. They're both quick enough. Cecotto did that comeback at the end of last year, did the last 2 rounds with Rapax and looked really strong in Abu Dhabi. They've both been going really well in testing, although we never really know what strategy the different teams are on in each session. De Vries says he's really, really happy there because it's the first time he's driven for an Italian team since his karting days, and we know how strong he was in karting. He had a phenomenal record when he came into car racing, and he just feels like he's back to that situation again with the people he's working with. So yeah, they're proper outliers, I'd say. I don't know if Jordan would agree on that.
I think it's difficult to see where they are in testing, as they were kind of always there. They were quite late signing, so it was kind of a bit of a hum around the pit lane that it was, very much going for the headline times to try and help some sponsors come across the line. Who knows? It clearly were quick anyway. They can put a lap in, even if they were going for times. They can do it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when actually the going gets tough. You got 40 minutes practice straight into qualify and race. It's all a bit different. But Rapax put a good car. They've won the championship. Cecotto at the end of the year finished 2nd in Abu Dhabi. So he's got a good car. They're both good drivers, so yeah, it should be interesting to see what happens. But same again, I think that's one of the ones you're not quite sure. You wouldn't be surprised if they win races, as Marcus said, but it's a strange one at the moment because they were kind of a bit too quick at the start of testing to look actually that quick kind of thing.
They wouldn't be the first to do that in motorsport. I mean, obviously Cecotto built a little bit of a reputation for himself as a bit of a wild driver, a few incidents in the past. And Sergio Canamassas, who's recently confirmed at Trident, he's got a bit of a reputation as well for some incidents. I seem to think you are on the list of drivers who've had a moment with Canamassas in the past.
I think everyone has, haven't they? I don't think it's particularly prejudiced to one person. It's just a general. No, Johnny Cecotto, looking at GP2 or Formula 2 now, when I was coming up the ranks, he looked like one of the crazy ones. But actually racing against him, I think he's probably past those days now, and more than fair between both of you. Sergio Canamassas, I think he still likes it. He just gets enjoyment out of it. He must do. Everyone's come across him. I think it's just part of the package of the championship.
So he's just one of those drivers you just hope you don't make your pit stop and come out behind him and have to go past him.
You just have to think a bit more. Pick your battles a little bit more with him.
He is very entertaining to watch, though, and watching him overtake in Monaco, I think he just doesn't really have any.
It's more the
uncertainty.
Normally overtaking people. When I was at Silverstone when I was racing Pierre, we both knew where each other were going. We gave each other room, and we were very, very close. We were within a couple of inches of each other, but there was no problem. The same with Sorokin in Hungary. I remember we went side by side for about 4 corners in a row. I made it a very difficult job for myself, but that's a different story. And you knew what everyone was doing. You knew roughly what was happening, but it's the curveball that Sergio can throw at you sometimes, where you just never know what's going to happen, which makes it good fun.
That's a bit of fun for the spectator, but maybe not for the driver on the receiving end. Well, we've talked about F2 a lot. We've also got the European F3 Championship that starts the same weekend. GP3 starts in support of the Spanish Grand Prix. Obviously, Marcus keeps a very close eye on both those championships, F3 in particular. So, Jordan, you're a former British F3 champion. You're not raced in GP3, but it's obviously the same paddock, so you'll have a bit of a feel for it. Coming back to the whole structure of single-seater racing, where does GP3 and F2 fit in? Obviously, when the announcement was made about F2 being recreated for this year, there was an interesting comment from Domenicali in the FIA release which cited, F2, we've got everything we need to craft a clear and logical path for single-seater drivers from grassroots for Formula 1. He went on to cite FIA Formula 4 at national level, European F3, then F2. There wasn't a great deal of mention for GP3, so...
Or any.
Exactly. Well, it feels like what might be called the 3 level of racing is ripe to be consolidated.
It's very, very early days, because this is an obvious follow-on from GP2 becoming Formula 2, and there was no point really going into major discussions before that happened. Now that GP2 has become Formula 2, presumably you would hope that these things are being discussed and looked at. And really, you'd have to say, having Formula 1, Formula 2, and then GP3 on the same package doesn't make any sense in the eyes of the fan. It should be Formula 1, Formula 2, and Formula 3. And then at the same time, we've got a situation where we have only 11 teams now left in those 2 championships in total. At the moment, we're looking at 19 cars on the grid for Formula 3, and as we speak, there's 16 or 17 drivers signed up for GP3. So that's a total of only about 35 or 36. So it is a struggle at the moment at that level of the sport. The 2 series do work in competition to each other, and the early indications are that they will at least talk about one of those championships falling by the wayside in a couple of years, without meaning any disrespect to GP3. I think the general wish of most purists is that Formula 3 is the one that continues as Formula 3 rather than GP3. I think probably most drivers would prefer to come up through Formula 3 as well.
Well, Jordan, you're a driver who's come through that route. Obviously, you've a lot of experience of F3. I think you briefly tested GP3 a few years ago, so you've got a little bit of...
Yeah, I did one session in GP3
so
with a broken damper, so that wasn't that great. I personally leant toward the F3 side because it's a great car. You can't beat Formula 3. The power to weight and the balance you can get from the car. You can create a really nice race car. I think it's a shame that they've gone to paddle shift, because the stick shift created a much better car to drive. It gave another aspect, and it really did separate the good and bad drivers, where as soon as you went to paddle shift, it just muddied the water and it meant anyone could be quick. I think it's hard to see the 2-3 championships still existing together, and GP3 probably going from that, especially now as Formula 2 is called Formula 2 and not GP2.
So Marcus, F3 European Championship this year. The drivers that stand out, they're Maxi Gunter, back at Prema this year, and Callum Eilert, who's now also there. They seem the 2 drivers who are best placed to be up front. Yeah,
they're probably the 2 favourites on paper, really. Both of them are at Prema, who are clearly the top team in Formula 3. That's not to say they're unbeatable, because people prove that time and time again. But
it's post Lance Stroll Prema as well.
Yeah,
so
well, this is the quite interesting thing in that last year it looked as though Lance was very much the team's favourite to go for the championship. I think it's fair to say. And then the year before that, Felix Rosenqvist was very much the lead driver in the team to go for the championship. But this time, we've got 2 drivers in Callum Eilert and Maxi Gunter who look extremely evenly matched. They've both done 2 seasons in F3 so far. Gunter's already had 1 year at Prema, finished second to Lance Stroll last season. But Callum is also an extremely talented driver, and it's going to be a question of, I think, who gets an edge over the first few rounds.
And the other drivers who stand out, we've got Lando Norris at Carlin. Obviously, he's a hugely promising driver. Yeah. Jake Hughes at High Tech, Joel Eriksson at Motorparts. There's again a bunch of drivers who have got pace and maybe the ability to get involved in that championship fight if they find that last 1% here and there.
Exactly, and those 3 drivers, Lando Norris, Jake Hughes and Joel Eriksson, are the 3 drivers who we've picked out in this week's Autosport magazine, out on Thursday, to in Who Can Take the Fight to Prema.
That's an excellent plug.
Yeah, Ericsson is the only one of those three who's already done a full season in Formula 3, and he's staying with Motorsport for a second season. He looked very, very strong right from the beginning of last season. A couple of things went wrong for him, as they often do for rookies, but he ended up pretty much as the leading challenger to Stroll, leading consistent challenger to Stroll by the end of the season. So I'm expecting really good things from him. Lando Norris has obviously had a lot written and said about him over the last few months, deservedly so, because
and of course the McLaren Autosport BRDC award winner from last year.
Right, yeah. So he is coming into Carlin, who had a shocking 2016 in F3, really, but really came back in force at the end of the year in the final round of the championship at Hockenheim, when Lando joined them for his first F3 race outing, and then obviously they went to Macau. Lando made a bit of a silly mistake in the qualifying race, where he hit the wall on the run away from the start on the opening lap, but stormed through the field in the Grand Prix itself on the Sunday, and Antonio Felix da Costa won the race, and Jordan's new teammate Sergio Sacamara finished third, also in a Carlin car. So they ended the season on a high, so they're looking good. And then you got Jake Hughes, who basically, looking at the way he drives a Formula 3 car, you'd say that he probably should have done that last year instead of GP3, because he's very, very smooth. Style just looks absolutely perfect for F3, and he came in at Hockenheim and immediately was qualifying up at the front and finished on the podium. And then also he went to Macau with Carlin and finished as the top rookie in sixth place. So he's actually been snapped up by High Tech over the winter, which was quite an interesting one on the driver market. But I think they'll be very strong, and he's potentially going to lead that team.
Sean, is anyone leaping out?
Well, as we all said, that Prema are going to be hard to beat. I think they've won the championship 5 years in a row now, or whatever it is.
6 now.
Six years in a row. So there you go. They're going to be hard to beat. So it really is about taking it to them. But for me, I think it's Jake Hughes is the one that will be able to do that. That said, if he can work well with High Tech, and High Tech's the unknown quantity, but Marcus touched on it when he jumped in the car at the end of the year. He hadn't driven it before with Carlin at, where was it, Hockenheim. He wiped the floor with Lando Norris, finished third or second in the race, really showed a clean pair of heels. So I think if he can kind of get High Tech working well behind him, they'll be very strong, and he's the one that actually is more of a standout contender than the others, I think, especially for his experience and mileage in the car.
There's also a few famous names there, famous surnames anyway. Mick Schumacher, Harrison Newey, and Pedro Piquet. I won't introduce who their fathers are, but they're all very, very obvious to followers of motorsport. Obviously,
we should say that Mick's the son of Michael, not Ralph.
Yes, yeah, that's fair. Yeah, obviously Mick Schumacher and Harrison Newey have both had success in F4. Pedro Piquet had an erratic season last year, although there were a few moments where he strung it together and there was good pace. So should people be getting excited about this trip? Obviously, there's going to be a huge amount of attention on Schumacher on his step up to F3.
With Schumacher, I think it's probably good that the first round is at Silverstone, because he's probably going to be pretty much left alone to do his thing. Obviously, the British spectators are going to perhaps want to get a few photos or something like that, but I think it's not going to be anywhere near the mania that we might see in Germany. Hopefully be a more gentle introduction to Formula 3 for him. He is a rookie. I think really it's difficult to compare him with anyone other than Joey Mawson, who's at Van Amersfoort Racing, because it was Mawson and Schumacher who battled for the German F4 title last year. So Mawson won that. Good talent, Australian. A lot of people have worked really hard to get him the budget to be in there this season. But anyway, we weren't talking about that. We were talking about the famous names. Newey and Piquet are both coming into their second season, both staying with Van Amersfoort Racing.
Newey was a little bit disappointing in a way last year because he's a quick driver, isn't he?
I actually thought Piquet was the more disappointing because I thought Newey had the steeper learning curve because Piquet was coming from 2 years of F3, albeit in Brazil, but at least he'd been driving F3 type cars. Whereas Newey had come from the BRDC F4 Championship, plus doing as many German events as he could. Whereas the other F4 graduates were from Italian and German, which are both very, very competitive. So I thought Newey had the steeper learning curve, and I was a bit more impressed with him than I was with Piquet. And also Newey's had a very strong winter in the MRF Challenge based in India, which he snatched at the last round by winning it and getting the points for fastest lap. Just pipped Mawson to the title. So that will be good for his confidence, and he has been very quick in testing as well. Piquet has also been looking better than he did last year, but I think the thing with Piquet I'm most looking forward to is seeing whether he still has that 1983 Brabham livery on the car. but yeah,
either that or if he turns up in a Rolls.
Yeah, but hopefully, yeah. I mean, he's a nice lad, and I'm hoping that he can step up a bit and challenge over a race weekend, because apparently he was strong in testing last year. Just it was a question of putting it together in qualifying.
Let's also have a little bit of a look at GP3. Obviously, we're a bit further out from the start of the championship. It's earlier in testing. Looking at that field, which there's still a few gaps to be filled, it's the art lineup that stands out again. Jack Aitken, Nairo Fukuzumi, George Russell, Antoine Hubert. You feel that that's the place that the champion's going to most likely come from?
I think it's almost inevitable, really.
I can't see it coming from another team, to be honest.
We've got Jack Aitken, who ended last season, his rookie year in GP3 with Arden, very much on an upward curve. You'd say that he is someone that ART would definitely have targeted and wanted in their team over the winter because of his GP3 experience. He's quite low-key guy, not one to shout about things, so he tends to go a little bit under the radar, but he is a very good driver. Sitting here now, you'd probably say it's a battle between him and George Russell, but George is extremely good, very highly rated within the F3 paddock, but he's not done a GP3 season yet, so he hasn't gone through that quirky, random nature of a GP3
It'll be interesting
season.
To see how much support George gets from Mercedes, as obviously he's had their backing in Formula 3, where they have a direct, obviously on the engines, and with the DTM package, it's a bit more at home if you're a Mercedes driver. But obviously GP3 isn't so much related to Mercedes, so it'll be interesting to see actually how much effort and support he is getting from Mercedes during the year. Whereas Jack is obviously at Renault, where he was last year, so clearly there's already a good support through that anyway, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see who kind of backs their driver the most.
It does seem to be based on testing so far that George Russell is the one who's got maybe the little edge at the moment.
The test at Estoril was quite dodgy weather-wise, and as with anything, we don't know what programs the teams would have put their different drivers on. I wonder whether someone like Jack Aitken, for instance, doesn't need to go on new tyre runs from the beginning of testing because he knows how to use a GP3 qualifying tyre, whereas maybe that's something that you might put a rookie like George on just to get a bit of an early baseline.
See as well with rookies in testing, when they come out of something, they got a bit more confidence. It's all new, they're relaxed, they drive the car quite nice. Winter testing, it's colder, the grip's down, it's a bit easier. I remember in Formula 3 in winter testing, I was really strong in my first year, and I was thinking, this is going to be good. But then when you get into a race weekend, it just becomes a bit different. It's warmer. There's more grip there. You've got to do it in 20-minute session. It just changes the aspect of it. So there might be a little bit of that there. I wouldn't have thought so with George because he's now experienced enough to understand what he needs to do. But there might be a little bit of that there with, it's all fresh. It's the weather's a big thing that can make you can be 2 seconds a lap quicker around a circuit just because the weather's different. So there is always that as well.
Any other drivers you be tipping to cause a bit of a surprise in the other teams? So there's another famous name in Giuliano Alesi, son of Jean, although I think he's not going to be someone who, based on previous form, is going to be in the championship fight by any means.
Well, yeah, he was on probably the steepest learning curve out of everybody in junior single-seater racing last year, because he'd come from 1 year of French Formula 4 right up to GP3. Probably bit off a bit more than he could chew. You'd have said the logical move from there would have been 1 or 2 years in Renault 2-litre. So
it's like the logical move would have been for Jean Alesi to drive for Williams in 91 rather than Ferrari, isn't it? That was a family trait, though.
Anyway, but yeah, he did show flashes of speed last year, and let's see if he can put it together a bit more this year. But what I would suggest not to do is ignore the other two drivers at ART, because Nirei Fukuzumi is quick enough. We saw that last year, and Antoine Hubert is also a quick guy coming from Formula 3. Won races in Renault Euro Cup a couple of years ago, was a race winner in F3 last season. So they're not drivers you can discount. You might put Aitken and Russell ahead of them when you're tipping for the championship, but on any given race weekend, you couldn't rule Fukuzumi and Hubert out. I would say Nico Kari at Arden as well. He had a very impressive in places season in Formula 3 last year. Won a race at Imola, which is a pretty tough track. He's kept on the Red Bull scheme, and the only thing with him is he possibly needs to show a bit more maturity in the car to make it a bit more consistent than last year. He had the worst disciplinary record in Formula 3 last year as far as picking up penalty points in his licence was concerned. So he needs to sort that out, but he's getting, he'll be a year older. He is fast.
How about Yenza Motorsport? It's not one of the top teams in GP3, but they got Alessio Lorandi, a Pau Grand Prix winner. They've also got Arjun Maini, who's had flashes. He's a Karin Chandok protégé.
Yeah, they were teammates in Formula 3 at Van Amersfoort Racing in 2015, actually. Both of them a bit inconsistent so far in their careers, I'd say. Maini, to be fair, did really well once he switched to GP3 with Yenza quite early in the season last year, and I would say that if he can build on that and be quick straight out of the blocks, then he could have a good season. But having seen him in Formula 3, I think if he isn't quick out of the blocks, that could really affect him psychologically, and he might struggle to recover from that. Pretty similar for Lorandi, really. Lorandi is a driver who GP3 hasn't seen too much of, but he was quite up and down in Formula 3. He's absolutely phenomenal on street circuits, and especially in the wet. But on what you might call Tilke circuits, he's got a bit of a propensity to overdrive a bit, knowing that those tarmac runoffs are all around him. So that needs to be coached out of him a bit.
The interesting thing with GP3 this year, the big change, is the arrival of DRS. Jordan, you've used this in GP2 the last couple of years, I think. Your first season was the first season of DRS. What benefit does that bring? Obviously, it should make overtaking easier as long as the DRS is working. I know there are a few problems early on when the system wasn't quite working as it should have done, but obviously it makes overtaking more easy and potentially could improve the show. But from a kind of driver's perspective of preparing for Formula 1, what do you think you get out of having DRS?
Well, I suppose the the bigger question is Formula One going to keep it? Because now there's suddenly a buzz around the fact we don't want it anymore. So there's no exact science to the logic of where some of these things go. But I think the effects that the DRS will have in GP3 won't be quite as great as what we have in Formula 2, and even so what Formula 1 have.
Yeah. Less downforce, therefore.
Less downforce, and you look at their rear wing, it's not as big as well, so they're not reducing what they can by as much as we do.
They've tried to up the downforce a tiny bit with the change of that, haven't they? There's a little bit, not step changes, but a tiny bit. Nothing that will make vast difference, but I think they were a bit worried about that side of things.
Yeah. Well, if ever a championship needs it, I think GP3 does. Because they do struggle to overtake, they struggle to follow quite closely. Formula 2, probably not. We actually can follow quite closely anyway. But the biggest thing from a driver point of view is just getting used to using it. It's quite an easy system to use. You're just pulling a paddle, but it's still something else to do. In qualifying and in practice and everything, it's not that much of a problem because you pull it every lap, so you get used to braking at the same point. But obviously in races, you pull it some laps and then you don't pull it others, and with the tyre wear, your braking distances change as well. So if you're approaching the corner 15 kilometers an hour quicker, your braking distance is going to change as well, and obviously you need to judge that. You don't want to overslow the car, or you don't want to overshoot the corner, so you've got to judge the speed difference of where you need to brake, and then overtaking becomes a bit different. Do you overtake before the DRS zone or do you overtake after it? So there's just more aspects that you need to consider, which they have in Formula 1 10 times over, because you've got all the other things on the steering wheel as well.
Obviously, you've always got your eye on the next step, and Formula 1 obviously is the number one objective. But where are you looking forward career-wise? Are you starting to look at other opportunities and other categories? We see a lot of strong single-seater drivers getting into sports cars. Is this at the time where you need to think you have to have irons in multiple fires for kind of where you're going to settle in motorsport?
Well, 100%. I don't think it's much rocket science to work out that I didn't intend to do Formula 2 this year or GP2 this year. Unfortunate circumstances led to something else happening and a bit of a last-minute thing coming together.
So you're pretty sure that if Manor had been around, you'd have been able to get onto the grid?
I would have tried to go for that one, yes. Whether I was on the grid is a metaphorical question because it doesn't exist.
You might as well say, yeah, you would have been, and you'd definitely been on the podium in Australia. That's
there you go. I can't be quoted for that one. My goal has always been Formula 1. That's the dream I had as a child, and I'm as close as I ever have been, but also feel as far away as you ever have been. I think that's the irony of the closer you get to where you want to be, the harder it gets. I still want to make that reality, but the reality of it is very tough. So there's lots of other motorsport options around the world. You've got America, you've got Japan. Their home nation motorsport's very strong, so there's always options to move further afield. We see Formula E growing very quickly. I'm not sure that is the answer to motorsport, but that is the way it's going to go. Whether us as motorsport fanatics of the purest form like it, all motorsport will be electric racing at some point in the future because we're going to run out of fuel. It's quite a simple equation. We can't have combustion engines. So I'm actually quite excited by the prospect of Formula E and the direction Formula 1 has gone with the engines. And, as a feat of engineering, producing a 1.6 litre engine that can put out almost 1,000 horsepower, I think is very impressive. So I think that side of motorsport I am personally quite interested in. The electric side, the growth of that market anyway. So I could see myself participating in that form of motorsport because I'm quite personally excited about it. And then obviously there's the sport car option. It's massive. There's factory teams in there. There's wealthy individuals who want to go racing as well. So there's lots of other sources of income. There's not so much commercial income, where Formula 1's trying to run it on commercial income, sponsorship and marketing, where that side of things is from manufacturers and individuals bringing money to the table.
So it sounds like all options open. I guess that's
all options open. Yeah,
a driver in your position has to look at every opportunity and try and find somewhere to settle down and be a professional driver, I guess.
Yes, yeah. I've been in a very fortunate position where I've had some very good backers and partners over the years that have helped me get to where I have. But there comes a point where you kind of want to not rely on them and rely on someone else that that pays the bills. And manufacturer support is, I think, where it's at. But there's not very many manufacturers putting a lot of money into motorsport at the moment.
Well, it sounds like there's plenty to look forward to in the F1 feeder categories over the coming year. Autosport will carry full coverage of Formula 2, Formula 3, GP3 throughout the whole season, both in the magazine, out every Thursday, and on autosport.com, which also carries all the latest news and features from the whole world of motorsport and Formula 1. Obviously, we'll be following Jordan's progress, among others. So thanks very much for coming in, Jordan, and offering your insights, which is it's great to have a driver's perspective. Please subscribe to the Autosport Podcast on iTunes and various other podcasting platforms. We're coming out every week with podcasts, and in fact this one will be one of 2 podcasts this week, as we'll also have the post Chinese Grand Prix podcast coming out. So thanks very much for listening. We'll be back soon with another Autosport Podcast. Music is 6am by Trilo, written by Marcus Simmons. See soundcloud.com/Trilo Music.